Hello, my name is Avery. You probably already know that if you're coming from my Instagram, but if you just happen to stumble across this video on the internet, hello, it's nice to meet you. I've never made a YouTube video before, but I wanted to try it out because I have a lot of things to say about the Tate McRae sophomore album, Think Later. Now, obviously, this album came out months ago, but it's something that I just haven't been able to kind of get off of my brain. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, analyzing it, and I've compiled a ton of notes to hopefully put together in this video so that I can just stop thinking about it and move on to something else, because I just need to move on at this point. The first time that I saw Tate was on So You Think You Can Dance, The Next Generation. From there, I kind of started following her on Instagram and then slowly started getting introduced to her music. And, I listened to her debut album and I thought it was okay. Some songs I liked on it. Particularly, I actually really like Chaotic, and I was very impressed that she used that ballad as one of the lead singles off of that album. But altogether, I thought the album was very meh and not really for me, not really my style. But I kept following her and I was interested to see what she was going to do next. Now, obviously, she's had a couple collaborations and a couple songs in between. What is that album called? I Used to Think I Could Fly and Now. But of course, the main, reintroduction and the next era began with Greedy. When Greedy was released, I listened to it, thought it was pretty good, downloaded it, and I liked the direction that she was going in sonically. But I was actually really surprised that Greedy was the song that blew up for her, because I feel like it's pretty generic and I didn't think it was anything super special. However, because everybody else was so interested in it and because Greedy blew up in the way that it did, I was very excited to see what Tate was going to do next. And then, of course, she dropped X's. Now, X's, I definitely wasn't a huge fan of right away, but I really liked the music video. Specifically, I think that in a lot of Tate videos, they never show the full choreography, and they're always cutting away and showing, close-ups of her and her on different sets, spliced up with the choreography rather than just showing the choreography. And one of my favorite parts of X's was that I really liked the choreography and we got to see it full out. And then, of course, after Greedy came out and X's came out, Tate started dropping little snippets of things. For instance, I know that she started teasing Run for the Hills and Hurt My Feelings. And I actually really liked the snippets of both of those, even more than Greedy and X's. And so now we had these 4 songs that were making me really excited for the album to drop. That, on top of just the general new interest in Tate from the public, was making me really excited to see what she was going to do with this moment, with this opportunity that she'd been given. And then, on, of course, December 8th of 2023, Tate dropped Think Later. Now, as I was listening to Think Later, I couldn't help but think that I had anticipated this album for so long, and this was it. I thought that a lot of the songs were good. I actually liked them a lot better than her debut album. But still, the album in general was underwhelming as a project. Because I am a music major, one of the things that I have to do every semester is 5 album reviews, and most of them have to be related to the instrument that I play and kind of like on brand. but some of them can be whatever I want them to be. And so one album that I did was Think Later. And so in this initial album review that I did, I tried to articulate what was not working for me about Think Later. And here are the two reasons that I came up with. The first was excessive auto-tune. Now, we've heard Tate sing live on many different occasions. She has many different acoustic sets. She has lots of things online of her singing with no microphone. So we know that Tate can sing. And I understand the need for autotune in general. Of course, everybody uses autotune. I even understand more heavily applying autotune to really poppy songs like a Greedy, like an X's. But for me on the album, especially during the ballads like Grave and Stay Done and Want That Too, I felt like the auto-tune really did not fit the style of those songs and made it seem like Tate can't carry a ballad, which I think that she can. It felt like it was giving her a crutch that she didn't necessarily need, and it just didn't fit stylistically for me. Another thing that I felt that the excessive auto-tune took away was the personality of Tate's voice. And when you're talking about pop music, especially songs like these, which are pretty formulaic and generic, if there's no distinguishable factors of your voice, no personality in your voice, that's going to make them really forgettable. I think taking away some of the auto-tune could have made Tate's voice and personality come out a little bit more than it did. The second thing is something that I already touched on a little bit, which is generic songwriting. I don't think that everybody needs to be an incredible songwriter, especially not in pop music. There's so many different elements to it besides just lyrics. However, Tate is somewhat known for writing songs, or at least being heavily involved in the writing process of her songs. So if she's going to put herself out there as a songwriter, then I feel that it's fair for me to critique the songwriting on the project. And what I'll say is that while there are some moments of light, which I'll talk about briefly in a second, I thought for the most part, the songs are very general, very repetitive in their topics, and the songs were very formulaic, as I mentioned before. I don't know if anybody's seen this TikTok trend. I mean, I'm sure people have seen it because people make TikToks with it, but there's a TikTok trend that says if an outfit isn't interesting by color, then it should be interesting by shape. And if it's not interesting by shape, it should be interesting by texture. And if it's not interesting by texture, then it should be interesting by color. And I think about this TikTok sound in relation to Tate's songwriting and the songwriting on this album in general. And I would compare it to if a song is not going to be interesting lyrically, it should be interesting with the production. And if it's not interesting with the production, then it should be interesting with the form. And if it's not going to be interesting with the production or the form, I think that it needs to give us something interesting lyrically to latch onto. We just need something to latch onto. And I feel like a lot of these songs ended up being repetitive and generic in the songwriting, in the production, and in the form, making it overall kind of bland. And even if the songs are good, they're forgettable. But I've critiqued the lyrics a lot, so I'm gonna go through and talk about some of my favorite lyrics from the album, just to give a little bit of positivity. In Cut My Hair, I like the line, singing about the same old stupid ass things, sad girl bit got a little boring. I think it's a good call out to her past self. I think it achieves the goal. It's got the right vibe. I like it. In Stay Done, there's a line that I almost like, which is, I've been nothing less than cordial, but if we're really talking morals, why'd you have to hit her up like that? You should know it isn't normal. I really like the beginning part of that, specifically with the rhymes of cordial and morals. But this is a good example of where I feel like Tate kind of dropped the ball, or her team, the writing team, dropped the ball a little bit with the second half of this phrase. The payoff to, if we're really talking morals, is why'd you have to hit her up like that? And I just feel like that's such an underwhelming thing to be questioning somebody's morals about. And also, then you have, you should know what isn't normal, which I guess fits, but it also kind of feels like they just took the first thing that they found that rhymed and ran with it, rather than trying to get really creative and figure out the best line that could have been there. Then in Think Later, we have, met you at a night out in Boston, put your hand on my thigh in the Commons, been drinking something blue, turn my phone off, because if it's not you, I don't want to talk. Now, this is one of the opening lines of the song besides the Live Now, Think Later part. And I like this part because it's got some specificity to it, which is something that I think is lacking in a lot of the other lyrics. Met you at a night out in Boston, thigh on the Commons, drinking something blue, right? And it gives us a little bit of a story. It gives us some details about this night, and it makes it a little bit more believable. Another line that I like is, my friends got scared and they called the cops, but I'm just at the Ritz with the door locked. I think that this has just enough subtlety to pull off the swag and the confidence and the kind of badassness that Tate is going for. Compare that to laughing in the back seat of the black car. It's not a good night if you don't take it too far. This one is so much worse than the Ritz line, let me just say. Specifically, especially the way that she sings this line, saying, it's not a good night if you don't take it too far. It just feels awkward. And it feels like I can tell that they wrote the Ritz line first and then tried to come up with anything to fill this spot going into the second chorus. And to be honest, it feels like a Kidz Bop version of itself. Like, it feels like there was something more explicit in that line, and then Kidz Bop had to take it and be like, it's not a good night if you don't take it too far. So yeah, no, not a fan of that one. Then in Want That Too, it's got one of my favorite lines, which says, heard you throwing shots, watch 'em ricochet, I got time for everything but your shit today. I think Tate actually can pull off swearing in a lot of different parts of her songs, which is not a thing that every person, every artist can pull off. But I think it sounds pretty natural when Tate swears. Also, this song is very much about not giving a fuck anymore about your ex, and I think that this line fits it. Now, after I did that initial review of Think Later, it still stuck with me, and I still felt like there was some element of the album that wasn't working for me that I hadn't put my finger on yet. And eventually, it kind of came to me that the order of the album felt really strange and really off to me. So I decided to do a fun experiment and revamp the album. I deleted a couple songs that I felt like didn't belong on the album, and I reordered the entire album to have an order that I feel like makes a lot more sense, because I feel as though there was not a ton of thought put into the order of the songs. I think there are a lot of choppy transitions between the songs. I think that the themes of each songs don't really work in the order that they go on the album. And I think just generally it makes it feel more like a playlist than an album. I'm a big concept person. I really appreciate it when I can tell that there was thought put into an album and thought put into the order. And I just feel like, to me, the extent of the planning for this album seems to be concerned with only tempo, doing a couple fast songs and then a couple slow songs and then pick up the tempo a little bit more and then maybe slow it down again and then pick it up, which I think is an important factor to consider. But if doing that completely messes up the thematic content of each song, maybe rethink it. Maybe rethink it, because it really doesn't seem like they put a lot of thought into what each song is about and how that would lead into the next one. Specifically talking about how a lot of these themes on the album are repetitive, I saw someone on Reddit say that it's basically just Tate saying, I shouldn't be with them, I should break up with them, but I just can't. And that is 100% true. I mean, that's a ton of songs on this album. But I like to look at it as, you know, it's about a relationship. And I think that there's something to creating an album that follows the arc of a relationship. But I think that the best way to do that is in somewhat chronological order. Even if it's not the actual real-life chronological order of Tate's life, at least in order that makes sense chronologically to us as listeners. And so that's kind of the direction that I went. But first, we should probably talk about the songs that I deleted off of the original track listing. I deleted We're Not Alike because I really didn't like that song. That was probably the only song on the album that I actively disliked. I think that lyrics weren't there, production wasn't there, melody wasn't there, it just wasn't there for me. Calgary, I got rid of that one because it just didn't fit within the chronology that I was trying to create. And also, we already have an acoustic guitar ballad with Plastic Palm Trees, which I think is a stronger song and makes a lot more sense on the album than this one, so I cut this one. I got rid of Messier, which is another one that I like, but it does have that repetitive theme of I shouldn't be with him, but I'm gonna be with him anyways, or I can't let him go, or something like that, right? I think it was one of the weaker ones, and I actually chose to keep Guilty Conscience over Messier, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. And the last one I cut is actually Cut My Hair. Now this one is one that I actually really like, and I really like it as an opener. However, I think that there's a stronger opener for the era and the vibe and the aesthetic and the attitude and the image that Tate is trying to create with Think Later, the album. I think that Cut My Hair is just a little bit too passive for me. It's a little bit too safe of a choice for me. And though I like some of the lines in it, I wish that the song had been about I'm gonna cut my hair and be a new version of myself, a more confident version of myself, right? But if you listen to the chorus, it ends up being more of a I'm gonna cut my hair because I want this person so much. Rather than cutting her hair for herself, she's cutting her hair for this other person to make them want her and to want to break up with the person that they're with, you know? The chorus specifically gave me very pick-me energy, which I'm not really on board for. And now let's talk about my order, the superior order. Let's just say that right now. Number 1 on Think Later Revamped, my version of Think Later, is the title track, Think Later. This is a hard-hitting opening track. It comes in with that aggressive bass right away that I think really grabs your attention immediately. It's a very in-your-face song, and I think that if Tate is going for this more confident, this more badass aesthetic that I feel like she's been trying to do with Greedy and with Exes, I think that Think Later sets that up perfectly. Also, it's the title track for a reason, you know? It's the title track because this album really is about doing things impulsively and then regretting them later, or knowing in the moment that this is a bad decision and then regretting it later. And so I think to have Think Later as the first track just makes sense to me. Also, I'll note that Tate opened the NHL All-Stars halftime show with Think Later. She didn't do a full performance, but there was a little intro of Think Later. And I just want to say, why do you think that that worked so well? To me, that worked so well. And the reason is because Think Later is a good opener, and it would have been a better opener for this album than Cut My Hair. All right, sorry if the angle has slightly changed, but we're dealing with storage problems. Something else that I like about Think Later as the opening track is that it says met you at a night out in Boston. And since I'm going for a chronological thing and it's mainly about the arc of this relationship that Tate is in, it just makes sense for the first track to have when they met. And that moves into track number 2 of Think Later Revamped, which is Hurt My Feelings. Now, I understand what the original track listing was doing with putting Greedy as the second song. I think that a lot of albums put their lead single as the second song, or at least, very near the top of the album. However, I think that Greedy can and will be better placed somewhere else on the album. And I think that Hurt My Feelings would have been a great option as the next single, or the single to be released when the album came out. I can totally hear it playing on the radio. I think it would do really well on TikTok and all the other places. I think that Hurt My Feelings should have, and still can be, a single for this album. It's fast-paced, it's fun, and it also progresses the story just a little bit more. And I think it gives this example of Tate doing something and not thinking about it first. She's going after somebody who is clearly in a relationship, and I think as listeners, we can hear that and be like, no, Tate, hello, Earth to Tate, like, do not do that. But that's the point, is that she's doing something that she's not supposed to do, that she is going to regret later, but she does it anyways, right? And so I think it fits very well into the narrative. Track number 3 is Run for the Hills. Again, another song that I would love to see as a single. I think that Run for the Hills and Hurt My Feelings have some of the best choruses on this album, and I particularly love the production in Run for the Hills. Run for the Hills is the first iteration that we get of this I shouldn't be with him, but I want to anyways, or I'm gonna be with him anyways. I think that it shows a little bit more of Tate's heart getting involved than Hurt My Feelings. So, we get that progression in this song, but it still has that element of fun and excitement of a new relationship. Now, track 4 is Stay Done. This song is a change of pace from the first 3. I think starting off with 3 more up-tempo, or at least more, fun, poppy songs makes sense. And then we can transition, especially now that the album is a lot shorter since I've deleted 4 songs, it makes sense for me to do a song that's a little bit more low-key, has a little bit of a slower tempo. We can wind things down for a second. And I think that Stay Done works really well in this position because, again, we're kind of just getting deeper and deeper into the mess and the toxicity that is this relationship. And it's got that similar message of I shouldn't be with him, but I'm gonna be with him anyways. But the production is completely different. It's a completely different vibe, so it keeps things interesting, it keeps things fresh. But also, I think it's important that at this stage in the chronology, in the arc, that Tate is still romanticizing this idea of we're bad together, but we're bound. You and I are bound to be together, and there's nothing I can do to let go of you because we're soulmates. That kind of romanticizing a toxic relationship. I also just really like the guitar. I think that it adds a fun element that is different from a lot of the other songs on the track list. And that brings us to track 5 on Think Later Revamped, which is Guilty Conscience. Now, this was the one that I ended up keeping over Messier, and I'll tell you why. First of all, this one is a little bit more up-tempo than Messier, and I think after Stay Done being a bit of a slower song, bringing up the tempo a little bit is good. It's a good change of pace, especially since the topic of this one is also, I shouldn't be with him, but I'm gonna be with him anyways. So we get that change in production with Guilty Conscience. And another thing that I think that we get with Guilty Conscience, or at least the way I read this song, is a little bit more genuine anger and genuine bitterness and a little bit of sadness going on in this song. Again, we're getting deeper and deeper into this hole that is this relationship. However, whereas in Stay Done, it really sounds like Tate is actively choosing to stay in this relationship that she knows is bad. In Guilty Conscience, it really feels like Tate is stuck, and that while she may want to get out of this relationship, she feels like she's invested too much time, effort, and energy into it, so she's just kind of resigned to stay. This doesn't sound like something that she wants to do anymore. And that, of course, leads us into Grave. Now, Grave is something that I need to talk about because, to me, Grave on the original track listing is just the biggest mistake that they made. Because to me, Grave is the turning point in the album. In this song, Tate is quite literally putting the relationship that we've spent the first 5 tracks talking about, putting all of that to rest. The song says you can only dig the grave so deep, you can only try and save something that's not already gone, which feels very final. It feels very complete. To me, it feels like a real, like, I am done. And yet, what comes after Grave in the original track listing? Stay Done, a song about how you're gonna go back to this person and you're always gonna be with this person. It makes 0 sense. And to me, that shows kind of the lack of intention that was put into creating this album. And I just feel like it could have been ordered so much better. In this version of the album, when we get to the end, when we get to the bridge where she sings, the sad thing is that you had me for a minute. It really is sad to listen to because we as listeners have heard in pretty chronological order the timeline of this relationship and how it just kept getting more intense and went from this fun kind of like forbidden thing to something that's really tearing Tate up emotionally. It's a sad song, but it's also really, really necessary. It's a very cathartic song of finally letting go of this weight that's been dragging her down. Which brings us to track 7 of Think Later Revamped, which is Exes. I put Exes here because I think that, number one, to have a breakup song followed by a song called Exes is just perfect. And number two, I think that this song very much has this phoenix rising from the ashes kind of vibe, kind of tone to it. And I love that, and I think it's absolutely perfect after we've gone on this journey and gotten to Grave, gotten to the turning point of the album, to get back into the badass Tate persona, you know? And this time, as listeners, I believe that we're really rooting for Tate because, like I said, we've watched her go through this journey. Also, just in general, Exes picks that energy back up. We've had this kind of string of 3 songs, really from Stay Done to Grave that's been a little bit slower. Though Guilty Conscience picks up the tempo a little bit, it's not a ton. And we've been in this kind of sadder section of the album for a minute. So we need to get back into having some fun. And I feel like this creates the perfect pacing. Like, it's just enough sad to create that emotional range, but not like drag the album down. So we're back into this fun with X's We're the Phoenix, rising from the ashes. Or we're not, Tate is, but you know, we live vicariously through her. And then we get into track 8, which is Greedy. Now, I debated putting Greedy after Grave or putting X's after Grave, but I think that X's hits a little bit harder, and I think, like I said, it's just perfect to have X's right after a breakup track. So I put Greedy as track number 8 rather than 7, and it just kind of continues that fun vibe that we're getting back into with X's. It keeps the tempo up, keeps the fun up. We're kind of in the dance section and just the party section of Think Later. We're getting into the last 2 tracks of the album, and if you've done the math, you know what songs are left. And I left these 2 songs in the same order that they appear on the original track listing. So for number 9, we have Want That Too, and for number 10, we have Plastic Palm Trees. Now let's talk about Want That Too first. Want That Too is a perfect second to last track, and honestly, it's one of my favorites just altogether on the album. I think it has a really good chorus, and I think it has one of, if not the strongest bridge on the album. I think that she could have hit the bridge a little bit harder with the vocals, gotten a little bit more aggressive, you know, gotten a little bit more emotionally into it. But I think the backing tracks are doing a great job making up for the little bit of lack of emotion from the lead vocals. And it does enough for me. It does enough. And I really, really like this track. Plus, you know, it's slowing the tempo down again after we've gotten these 2 up-tempo tracks with X's and Greedy. So we're slowing things down again to kind of finish out the album. And really, this is the song that is reflecting on the relationship and reflecting through the journey that she's been on with this relationship. Finally, at this point, she kind of understands that she was taken advantage of and understands that she was treated poorly, and she's still rightfully a little bit angry about it, but she just seems more over it and like she's genuinely moved on. I think that this carries so much more weight with the track listing as I've put it in this video, because I believe that she doesn't regret the breakup, and that she's not going to forget the things that this person has done to her, as she says in Want That Too. Whereas when you're going back and forth throughout the entire album and we never really land on a definitive I'm done, then when we get to Want That Too, it just feels hollow. You know, in the same way that putting Stay Done after Grave makes Grave feel hollow and meaningless and just pointless. Like, what was the point of that? I think that putting Want That Too after the original track listing is kind of like a, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And that brings us to the closing track of Plastic Palm Trees. I think that this song was basically built to be a closer. I wouldn't be surprised if they wrote it knowing that it was a closer. It's just a generally good idea to, you know, bring things back out to a broader scale. So, you know, Want That Too is reflecting on this specific relationship, but Plastic Palm Trees is the better closer because it's zooming out a little bit and reflecting generally on fame and on Tate's life in the current moment. And I think it really brings us full circle back to the opening track of Think Later, because, you know, Think Later is talking about kind of the glitz and glam of Hollywood and the nights out and all of this stuff We get hints in Think Later that, you know, this isn't all it's cracked up to be, but in Plastic Palm Trees, she admits to that. She admits that, you know, behind all of this glitz and glam is plastic. It showcases Tate's growth and change throughout the album, and though it's a kind of somber song to close with, it's also really peaceful, and it feels really fitting for the album. And another thing that I'll just quickly point out is that there seems to be less auto-tune on this track. Of all of the kind of slower, more ballad-like songs, this one feels like it has less auto-tune, specifically in the chorus when she sings, "Thought that I was fine, sitting in the back seat, in the mirror really looked like I was happy." I can hear the emotion in that part, which is something that, like I talked about before, I think the auto-tune kind of smooths over, and also something that I'm lacking from her in some of the other songs. I really hear it in this one. I think that it's just a really, really solid closing track, and it wraps up this arc that we've had very well. Those are my full thoughts on Think Later by Tate McRae, and that is my full Think Later Revamped. That is my new vision for the project. If I could go in and delete things and rearrange things and just redo what Tate has given us. Obviously, this is all my opinion. I'm still a big fan of Tate's. I think that she has a lot of promise if she does start to put a little bit more thought into her songwriting, into the ordering of her albums, and really treating the albums like full projects, like full bodies of work. She's already a great performer, and I think that she's only going to get better and better. So I'm really excited to see what the next steps are for Tate, and I'll definitely still be, you know, following along, and I'm obviously a fan. If I'm gonna make this video, I'm obviously a fan. So yeah, no hate from me. It feels strange to ask people to comment on a video that I'm not sure that anybody will watch. But if you're watching and you've heard the album or you listened to the album after this, I would love to hear your thoughts on the album. Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? Also, if you have your own Think Later Revamped, if you have your own track listing that's different from mine, leave it in the comments. I would be so curious to hear the switches that you would make and the songs that you would delete. I think it'd be really interesting to see all of the different iterations that we could come up with for this album. I'm not sure that I'll do any more of these videos, but this was a lot of fun. So thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far, and bye!